Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. It's finally time to get together with your husband and have a nice, intimate time together. And you start foreplay and you just find yourself thinking about the to-do list and the things that need to be done for tomorrow and the dirty dishes that haven't been cleaned yet. And oh yeah, your aunt sent you a Christmas present and you need to send her a thank you for that. Pretty much everything is on your mind except for sex and your husband. Look, we've all been through it. It's not your fault. It's actually really hard to stay in the moment as a woman. That is what we are talking about today in this episode, and we're going to give you some tips for how to not get distracted during sex. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I'm a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy. And I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. Joining me today is my semi-regular co-host, Kathleen Chavanis. This is something I like. And I don't want to say, oh, I'm fully healed from this. Right? This is something I truly used to really, really struggle with.
Yeah.
And now it is not as much of an issue. I still get distracted. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All the time. But it's just like, it is not as much of an issue. And I think from like just some tools that we'll talk about that I have learned about and like use. And then also I think one of the reasons that I often got distracted was actually more of a mindset thing, which I want to dive into a little bit about sex. But I want to start by pointing you to a podcast episode that is not this podcast. It is a podcast episode on pop culture catechism that I was on. This is with Mike Tenney.
I love that podcast.
Yeah, it was a super fun podcast episode. Like, it's just a fun listen.
I know a couple of you who are on it.
Yeah.
They were very fun listens.
He does like music and movies and like just, you kind of find like the truth and the beauty in like secular culture and like pop culture. So it's super fun listen, that podcast. But I did an episode with him several months ago at this point. Gosh, maybe even almost, I think like a year ago at this point. But it's songs about sex is what we talk about. And I will try to link that in the show notes. But during this podcast episode, it was revealed to me, and you'll hear it if you go listen. It's revealed to me that, so this getting distracted during foreplay, during sex is typically a very female thing. There are not a lot of men who get frustrated with being distracted during sex. But I was talking with Mike Tenney about this distracted feeling, and then also talking about how sex and prayer are so closely linked.
Yeah.
And he just revealed it to me like men and women both equally get really distracted during prayer. And then women struggle during sex with distraction. And that the parallels between these distractions are, they're just like identical types of distractions. They're identical. And so one thing to do is to explain this to your husband, that how you're getting distracted during sex is very similar to how he gets distracted during prayer. And so it's not that what you're doing isn't good. It's not that you want to be like doing all these other things, right? Prayer is very good. Going to mass is very good. Doing a rosary, like being in adoration, like those are all like such good things. So is having sex, but that it can be really easy to get distracted. And so that can just be something really helpful to tell your husband so that he can just understand that it's not that you don't want to be there.
Yeah.
It's not that like you'd rather be doing laundry, because like I would not rather be doing laundry. It's just that I know we need to do laundry, and that distracts me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think just a nice place to kind of like base that conversation.
I think that's a great, and we've talked about it before, where like sex essentially is like, it mirrors prayer in so many ways, right? Like prayer being a unifying of ourselves to God, a communication, like, you know what I mean? Like, I forget what word I was looking for, but yeah, it's communication with God in its most vulnerable and like purest form, right? Just this communication and raw. It can be raw, right? It should be raw. Whereas sex is similar, except with your husband or your spouse, right? It's communication in a very vulnerable and its rawest form. So it does make sense. It is interesting, though, that men and women both get distracted in prayer, but only women tend to get distracted.
I know.
In sex.
I feel like
it's like, why is
I
that
need to
the
reflect
case?
on that.
Yeah,
like,
truly.
why is that the case?
Truly, yeah. I think.
But okay, actually, no. Sorry. Let me. I just had an idea.
Reflect.
Yeah, I just reflected on it in the 5 seconds. Okay. All right. So
it wasn't even 5 seconds. It was like 5 milliseconds.
Holy Spirit inspiration.
That's right.
All right. So I've talked on the podcast about the feminine posture and the masculine posture before. Yeah. And this is not anything to do with male and female. These are postures. And all of us as humans are in the feminine posture with God. And the feminine posture is a posture of receptivity, right? So, we love because God first loved us. It's our prayer to God is always a response. Our love to God is always a response. So that's that feminine posture, is that response. In sex, again, talked about this on the podcast before too.
Yeah.
The man is in the masculine posture of giving first, right? His physical semen is given to the woman, who is in the feminine posture of receiving first, and receives that gift into herself physically, literally. And then in receiving, she becomes a gift, which is given back. And then there's like this cycle. Mm-hmm. So I think it may have something to do with this feminine posture position.
Interesting.
And
that's
that
really interesting.
When we as humans are in a place of receptivity, that's a incredibly human and very, very good place to be. And it's a place that somebody doesn't want us to be, right?
Well,
the devil doesn't want us to be in a really receptive, open position to something good, right? The devil would love us to be receptive and open to something bad.
Right.
And so being in that feminine posture and in that receptive place, I think it's just a place where the devil's going to be like knocking and trying to detract distract us from what we're doing. There's your 5 second.
I love it. Yeah. I also wonder too, if the fact that the feminine posture is more of a passive posture has something to do with it too, whereas the masculine posture is more active, right? It's like it's active versus passive. And I wonder if the passivity maybe also has something to do with the way distraction can kind of creep in so naturally. It's very interesting. But I mean, yeah, I will say that I am like, I don't know. I like joked in the beginning that you're going to be talking at me because I struggle with this so much. And I think that, I mean, I started reading, I didn't finish it because that's just what I tend to do. Start a lot of books and I don't always finish them. But I started Father Boniface Hicks's book on prayer called Personal Prayer. And it was in that book, he discussed at a point distraction and how when distraction, like it's always going to come. Like the goal is not to just like completely eliminate distraction, but it's to put it in its place, and that in prayer or in sex, right? To be able to acknowledge the distraction, like, okay, yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to put you over here right now, though. Like, this is not the time. We're not going to worry about it. I see you. I hear you. I will get to you later. You will have your time. But right now is not that time. And being able to put it away, because it's like when you try to just block everything out and when you try to avoid distraction completely, like it seems like it tends to get worse. It's honestly a very hard thing to do, where if you just acknowledge it first and then put it aside, it's easier to move on from the distraction. So again, really something that takes a lot of practice and something that I am not even close to have perfected. But I think it's something that we really need to, that we can take into just intimacy as women. Like I will also say that I think for me, especially, it's during those times of rest and sort of relaxation and rejuvenation and connection, all of those and times of almost leisure, right? And prayer, times where you're not, like, women are just so go, go, go so often. We are so active. And it is like, it's when we have that downtime or that time to connect that all the thoughts start coming in, because
Yes.
I think it's easier to rest our body and to calm our body than it is to calm our mind. Our mind is like constantly going with us. And so when you sit down and relax, your mind does not sit and relax. And it's almost like learning how to manage that, and to address the things. Okay, I acknowledge you. I hear you. I see you. Now is not the time for you, though. So we'll come back to that later. It is such a battle, though. It's like a true
It is.
battle.
You really like hit the nail on the head on the like number one tip that I was gonna give. So that was absolutely perfect. Is that like, it's not that we can just get rid of distractions. That is not the goal. The goal is not to like never be distracted. The goal is to gently like, say sayonara to the distraction for now. Mm-hmm. The worst thing that we can do, and I think this is like our gut reaction, is to get frustrated that we got distracted. And as soon as we get frustrated that we got distracted, now we have jumped completely out of the headspace of, intimate, unifying relations with our spouse. And now we're in a mindset of frustration.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where the devil wants you to be. Right. And so this is something to practice. And the cool thing about being a woman is you've got two solid places to practice this, right? You can practice this during sex and foreplay, and you can practice this during prayer. And it's the same tools. It's literally the same tools. So like, just go pray more. Right?
Yeah.
And like practice the art kind of when the distraction comes, acknowledge it, and okay, thank you. I don't need that right now. It reminds me of a book that I read when I was pregnant with my first, and it was talking about like the pain of contractions and like managing pain. And one of the things that it was talking about is like, if you fight the pain, then it's worse. But if you kind of just like let the pain come, then you can get through it faster. And one of the suggestions to practice was next time you stub your toe, instead of like jumping up and down and screaming, like just let the pain of stubbing your toe, which is like that so is minor so in
funny.
Comparison.
That's so funny.
Right? Isn't this hilarious? It stuck with me though. Oh my gosh. But just like let the pain of stubbing your toe just kind of like wash over you. And I tell you guys, stubbing my toe now is like not as big of an issue.
That's so funny.
But so there's another way to practice it, right? And that's, that's kind of a separate thing. That's pain, but it's the same mind tools that we're using. Is instead of a reaction that snaps us out of where we are, right? Instead of a frustrated reaction that takes us out of prayer, that takes us out of that intimate union with our spouse, that takes us out of, the glass of water we were trying to take to the 2-year-old.
Yeah.
When you stub your toe.
Yeah.
Instead of a reaction that takes us out of that mindset, we just accept that happened, that distraction happened. Okay. Yep. I do need to switch the laundry over before I go to sleep. I do. That is a true statement. Brain, thank you so much for reminding me. Now, can you remind me again in a half hour?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
In an
Yeah.
hour, whatever, 10 minutes. I don't know where you're at.
Yeah.
Maybe you just started.
No, I think that's honestly, I like what you said about like the connection to just like to pain and like letting things wash over you. Because for me, something that's always helped in terms of pain like that, right, is breathing. And
Mhm.
like growing up a dancer, right? And like I like danced. I like went to a performing arts high school. So it was like a big part of my day. Like I was like really invested in it and invested in getting better and all these things. And stretching was always something that I just like kind of hated. But I
Oh,
found
me
that
too.
as I breathed into the pain of a stretch, it like actually allowed me to stretch better. It's just that relaxing as you're like exhaling out, right? And I've taken that into life, into labor, and into like other things that involve pain, right? It's just that like breathe it in and then let it out, right? And I think that when we're talking about distractions, that can be a really powerful just I mean we know like breath work is just like important in so many ways. Like we talk about it with anxiety, and you know
Mhm.
just in panic and all this kind of stuff. Like breathing sends a message to the brain. So I almost wonder if we can use that visual of, okay, here's my distraction. I'm going to breathe it in, take it all in. I got it. Okay, now I'm going to let it go and breathe
Yes.
out. You
I
know,
love that.
yeah, just like something that we can try and just see how that physical cue of breathing and sort of like creating the mental image of like I'm taking it in, I hear you, I see you. Okay, now time to go away for now. You know, like could maybe help us in both
I
prayer
think that's
and
beautiful
sex.
because we are like body soul union.
We
So
are. Yeah.
attaching something physical to this mental
Right.
exercise, that's awesome. I love
Yeah.
that. Totally going to try that next time.
We'll be back with the episode in just a minute. Look, we all know intuitively that sex could and should be better. You're listening to this podcast. There's probably something that you'd like to improve in your sex life. But have you ever realized and told yourself that it actually really can get better? This was something that I myself struggled with so much in the beginning of my marriage when sex just sucked. I couldn't even imagine a world where it actually was good and we actually did fix the issues that we had in our marriage and in our sex life. This is exactly why I wrote the Catholic Sex Course for Women. I want to give you hope. Your sex life absolutely can be as good as you could possibly imagine it. And all it takes is some tools and some foundation. So please go check out the Catholic Sex Course for Women and create the sex life of literally your dreams. Go to findsandfullbloom.com/Catholic sex or click the link in the show notes.
Right, exactly. Now, the other thing I will say, kind of going hand in hand, and it's funny because I think, yeah, a lot of this, like with distraction, there's a lot of parallels to anxiety. There's a lot of parallels to pain, like you're talking about. Like there's just
Mhm.
so many parallels, which I think are interesting and which could be reflected on like forever.
Be a 3-hour long podcast
Yeah,
episode.
I think you could like
We won't do
really
that to you.
just no, we will not. Honestly, we don't even have that time today. But grounding techniques, right? Like breath work
Yeah.
is very much a grounding technique. But just those things like remember like using your senses, right? Like during distraction and like you do this like during like an anxiety attack or a panic attack, right? Like you use your senses. You name like 5 things you can see, 2 things you can hear, you know, or 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can feel, like whatever, like just that grounding of like what's actually around you. And there's no better place to do that than in sex, right? Like,
Right.
yeah,
Like
let's
grounding yourself in the
grounding
moment of
yourself in the
sex.
moment, right? When I find my mind starting to wander, the one thing that I've been doing consistently in those times is focusing on what I am feeling in my body, like focusing where my husband is, right? Like focusing on
Mhm.
what his fingers are doing or what you know, like all of those, like really being present to those individual and sometimes even looking at them, which it's funny because I think men are typically more visual. Like a lot of the times I think women almost like prefer their eyes closed to really focus on the sensation. But I think when you're in that moment of distraction, really opening your eyes and looking to see what's happening and paying attention in that way can really bring you more into the moment, you know? So using your senses during that time to say, okay, thank you, brain. I acknowledge that. Come back later. And then refocusing on the physicality of what's going on.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a really, really good tip. Particularly like if your husband is moving his hands over your body at that point, like that's a really solid thing to just like focus on, like, oh, like his hand is on my thigh and it's going up and down, and like feel where that is and just like really focus on that's just an example, right? Like wherever your husband's hand is. And on that kind of note is that you can ask your husband for help with this, because if you did what we suggested at the beginning and you kind of laid out like, look, this is actually just like a totally normal thing to be distracted and you know exactly how it feels.
Yeah.
And so can you help me during sex when I do get into one of those distracted states? And so you can actually like kind of communicate, because I think there's kind of two sort of big categories of distracted. There's like a simple task that pops into your head that is pretty easy to be like, okay, I'll do that later.
Right.
And then there's like a bigger thing that you're like, oh, I'm dreading this meeting that I have tomorrow, or I have to talk to that person, or there's an email sitting in my inbox that I have to respond to, you know, something that's like that you're dreading that pops into your head. And those are a lot harder to like process through.
Yeah.
This is where your husband can really help and you guys can just little trial and error, try some things, see what works for you. But what often works for a lot of women is if your husband can start talking to you, maybe he's telling you a story, like maybe he's painting a picture of like, hey, we're in a super fancy 5-star hotel on a private island, you know, and you build this story of where you are, right? So just blast your brain into a totally different spot. Or maybe he just starts talking to you about how your body feels, or how he's feeling, or what he likes, or what he's going to do next. Maybe he just starts telling you what he's doing. I'm moving my hand up and down, which, you know, outside of the moment, you're kind of like, that sounds dumb. But in the moment,
obviously, I know that.
Obviously, I know your hand is moving up and down my thigh. But it really can be quite lovely and sensual. Okay. But when like your husband's voice can help you like get back into the moment, what Kathleen was saying about like visually, like open your eyes, look what's going on, take that in, you know, act like put your 4-year-old in your brain, actually maybe like your 2-year-old, the one who parrots everything that's going on, put that in your brain of like, and so then your brain starts saying, my husband is moving his hand up and down my thigh. Like, and that's the voice you're hearing in your head.
Yeah.
Because it's just gonna like flood your brain with like getting yourself into the moment. And again, you got to trial and error, see what works for you. And then also what might work, like we've talked a lot about movement, like your husband moving across your body. That movement is really, really helpful because it stimulates multiple nerve endings on your body. And so if your husband isn't moving on your body, like isn't moving his hands on your body in that distracted time, you can ask him to move his hand, right? Like move your up and down my back. Like, can you rub my back? Can you rub my legs or whatever? Like if he can start moving his hands or legs or feet, like touching you in a moving way, not in a stagnant way, that can really help. Because again, you can like focus on that movement. You can focus on where he's at on your body. Maybe he can tell you where he's going to go or where he is. And so again, using those 5 senses to like pull you into the moment. And this is touch and olfactory, but olfactory is your nose. I'm sorry. Auditory.
Auditory.
Maybe light a candle. Use your olfactory sense.
Olfactory too. Like that's a thing. 100%. That can make or break an experience. Because let me tell you, I struggle in the mornings because of that morning breath. It's like I can't do this. Olfactory is it.
It's real.
It plays
it's big.
a part.
Yeah, no, it's very
a part.
important. So yeah, you could light a candle if it's at like a moment of sex that you really could pause. And that's kind of the last tip that I have is like, if you're at a moment that you can pause and it really is something that you like need to get out of your brain, like maybe you just got started, you're kissing and making out a little bit and you're like, can we have 5 minutes and can I just vent to you about this person tomorrow that I have to talk to? And like, be okay with like it's okay to pause. Now, granted, if it's like further along in the process, it might be really hard to like pause at that point. That might not be, it might not work. It might not be appropriate. But if it is, like that could be very, very helpful to just like get it out, get it off your chest. Or possibly like you could even have a little notepad next to your bed of like, hold on, I just need to pause. I just need to write this down really quick and then it'll be out of my brain. That can help. And again, it's like, okay, I've got that to-do list item. I need to do it. One of my favorites, if it's like a to-do list item that you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot forget this, is ask your guardian angel to remind you when you're done having sex. Like, can you remind me that I have to switch the laundry over because there's a very important uniform that is in the wash and it needs to be dry, Did
that? Or I literally did. That's exactly what I did this morning. I got up and I was like, oh shoot, into the dryer.
Yeah, like your guardian angel wants to help and without fail. Like I've never had a problem with being reminded. Like it'll pop back into my head when it needs to pop back into my head. And you can have so much peace with that. So those are just a few more tips that I had. And I wanted to finish off by just talking a little bit about mindset. And I think this is where I used to struggle a lot with getting distracted with sex, is when I was still kind of stuck in this, like, sex is just something I have to do. Sex is something that's for my husband and not for me. I don't really want to be here. I'm not enjoying this. Like when those were the thoughts about sex that I was having, distraction was immediate and constant. And so, if you're still feeling like you are in that mindset, then let's work on that mindset first and build in that sex is beautiful. It is for you. It's for your husband. It's for the both of you. It is a gift. It's something that is pleasurable and enjoyable. It is something that is good and holy. And so, maybe that means like binge listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
Or maybe pick up a couple of books that are on our book list and read through those and just really remind yourself that sex is good. Maybe have some conversations with your husband about where you're at with sex and just really work on that positive mindset towards sex. Because I know like when I was very much stuck in that spot, none of these tools would have helped. Maybe we should have started with this. It's like at the end of the episode.
No, I think it's appropriate to.
But it's like these tools wouldn't have helped me at all.
Yeah.
Because I was so stuck in like, I don't really want to be here. And why am I doing this? And this isn't fun. And so that might be the place where you need to start, is that mindset piece of that sex is very good, very holy, very pleasurable.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.